The file begins. By 2026, as the world merely adjusted to its new normal, the shadow of Playboy once more deepened over Hollywood. Kристал Hefner, a widow whose name was once synonymous with gilded cages, broke her silence. Her voice, cold and precise, demanded an investigation, not for money, not for fame, but an investigation into what was held within the archives of her late husband. 3,000 albums, diaries, personal, intimate. Pause. Approximately 3,000 testimonies where women were captured, and potentially underage girls, in moments where consent was merely a whisper, or entirely absent. These records, she asserted, contained not just images. This was the anatomy of a fall, an inventory of sins, details of intimate encounters, names, descriptions of acts, even menstrual cycles. All of it, she claimed, documented without genuine consent, perhaps under the influence of alcohol, perhaps at an age when consent is a fiction. Hollywood, accustomed to ghosts of the past, shuddered. The fear of a digital grave potentially exhumed from these films was palpable. For in the era of AI and deepfakes, the leak of such an archive is not merely a scandal, it is an exile. It was then, in this volatile space between accusation and denial, that old legends resurfaced. Whispers of secret tunnels connecting Hefner's estate to the homes of neighboring celebrities. Not just rumors, but a physical embodiment of fear. Fear that behind the glossy facade, a deeper, darker network had always been hidden. Unproven, yet tangible. Like the scent of smoldering ambitions and unfulfilled hopes lingering over Beverly Hills. Hefner's sons, Cooper and Marston, were quick to deny. They maintained that years of reviewing the archives had revealed nothing inappropriate. For them, this was a historical artifact, a legacy. But for the public, for those who remembered the echoes of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, these words sounded like the calm before the storm. Hefner's name, though not on direct lists, had already appeared in indirect connections, in auctions, in peripheral documents. The parallels drawn online were not mere speculation. They were a reflection of a deep, subconscious fear. A fear that the architecture of power and pleasure always implied hidden foundations. These new allegations, buttressed by previous revelations from the A&E docuseries Secrets of Playboy, became part of a posthumous audit. An audit dissecting not only financial flows, but moral ruins. And while Cooper Hefner attempted to reacquire the Playboy brand for $100 million, while 2025 financial reports unveiled the will's conditions, disinheriting for substance abuse, the true cost of the empire became increasingly evident. Not money, not fame, but scarred destinies. The whispers of tunnels connecting the mansion to the outside world ceased to be merely an urban legend. They became a symbol of invisible connections, secret passages through which flowed not only luxury, but something far darker. It was the fear that behind every glossy cover, behind every gleaming facade, lay a labyrinth of concrete and dirt, from which there is no escape, and where a cold, all-consuming silence always reigns. His empire was not built on shouts. It was erected on whispers, on the promise of what was forbidden. Hugh Hefner, a son of an accountant, a child of puritanical America, he saw a void of freedom, a void of color in a world that smelled of formaldehyde and post-war anxiety. His first magazine, born in '53, was not merely a stack of pages with naked bodies. It was a manifesto. He didn't sell sex. He sold a lifestyle, a polished myth of hedonism packaged in glossy paper. Temptation wrapped in a velvet cover. It was a meticulously constructed illusion of escape from routine, from prescribed roles. For men, power. For women, the appearance of independence. But behind this facade, even then, the contours of a future post-catastrophe were emerging. He was laying the foundation not only for an empire, but for its future wreckage. And every brick was gilded, yet mixed with dirt. The key to this new world, both physical and metaphorical, led to the mansion. Not just a house, but an epicenter. A place where the myth took flesh and promises seemingly became reality. In its early incarnations, the mansion was less a fortress and more a theater. A stage where Hefner played the lead role. He was the puppeteer, the architect of a new paradise. His silk robe became a uniform, his pipe a scepter. Here behind concrete walls, surrounded by tropical greenery, he created his version of Eden. A place where time flowed differently, where the rules of the outside world dissolved in the scent of pool chlorine and expensive cigars. It was an invitation to the big league, an entry ticket to a world where wealth and beauty were currency. But every guest, every inhabitant unconsciously signed an unspoken pause contract. A contract written in golden ink on parchment made of others' fates. And this contract, like the mansion itself, was merely a glossy wrapping for pause, broken lives, which would one day be inventoried. Broken lives which would one day be inventoried. The gilded cage, however grand, eventually showed its seams. Long before the recent tremors, a different kind of audit began. Not with official subpoenas, but with the quiet, persistent hum of dissent. A low thrum of accusations from former residents, from those who had seen the inner mechanisms of the myth. They spoke of a different kind of currency exchanged within those velvet walls. Not just fame, but silence. Not just pleasure, but pause compliance. These early narratives, often dismissed as bitter grievances or the price of ambition, painted a stark contrast to the carefully curated image. They were the first cracks in the concrete facade. Whispers of an ecosystem designed for control, where vulnerability was an asset and loyalty was enforced through subtle, sometimes overt means. The public, enamored by the fantasy, largely chose to ignore them. Or perhaps they simply couldn't fathom the scale of the quiet, pause transactions. It was easier to believe in the dream. The dream was expensive, but the cost for some, it would turn out, was far higher than anyone imagined. This was the nascent stage of the inventory. The shadows were lengthening. The whispers grew into a persistent undertow, pulling at the foundations of the empire. While public perception remained largely intact, the legal machinery, slow and deliberate, began its own quiet investigation, not always with convictions, but with questions. Questions about consent, about the nature of the power dynamics. These were not the sensational headlines of later years, but the quiet probes into alleged abuses that were routinely buried beneath the weight of influence and the allure of the brand. There were claims of orchestrated environments where lines blurred between aspiration and pause exploitation. Accounts of women, seemingly eager for fame, finding themselves trapped in a labyrinth of unspoken rules and expected behaviors. The mansion, once a symbol of liberation, began to acquire another, darker reputation in certain circles. A place where dreams were not just made, but sometimes pause consumed. Even the periphery of his orbit hinted at shadows. His name, though not on the infamous client list, appeared in other documents, tangential to networks far more sinister. It was a subtle, chilling detail, suggesting a proximity to the very anatomy of decay, a truth meticulously obscured by a lifetime of carefully managed illusions. The final reckoning was still decades away, but the ledger, in its own silent way, was already being compiled. It was already being compiled. And then, just as the mansion's walls seemed ready to crumble under the weight of accusations, an old ghost emerged from the shadows. Pause. Tunnels. The legend of underground passages connecting the mansion to the homes of Hollywood's elite had once again taken form. For a long time, this was considered an urban myth. Whispers in corners. Fodder for the tabloids. But now, in light of new revelations, these concrete arteries took on a sinister meaning. They weren't just rumors. They were pause escape routes, or worse yet, delivery routes. Blueprints resurfacing from archives revealed not just opulence, but pause strategy. Every turn, every hidden entrance, evidence of calculated architecture of concealment, an anatomy of downfall laid out beneath the earth. This wasn't just an inventory of sins, it was a map of pause escape, the wreckage of an empire, hidden beneath a layer of concrete. Эти подземные пути вели не только к другим домам. Они вели к пауз-молчанию, к культуре, где слова были тяжелее золота, а правда опаснее лжи. Многие видели, многие знали. Но голос имел свою цену, и цена эта была непомерной. Инвентаризация грехов продолжалась десятилетиями, но свидетельства лежали под спудом. Страх потерять все. Страх быть, пьюз, изгнанным. Мясорубка славы перемалывала не только тела, но и души. Она лишала их голоса, а иногда и пауз памяти. Отдельные шепоты пробивались сквозь тягучую тишину, но они тонули в грохоте вечеринок. Или в шелесте пауз купюр. Это не просто хроника падения, это анатомия страха и доказательств, которых никогда не было. Или которые были слишком хорошо спрятаны. Горькое завещание, написанное чужими слезами. A bitter testament penned with strangers' tears. With the years, the whisper became deafening. The mansion's golden facade, once a symbol of boundless indulgence, began to crumble, revealing the concrete and dirt beneath. It was not a sudden collapse, but a slow pause, inevitable decay. The public consciousness, once enthralled by the gleam, began to see only the shadow cast upon its foundation. The rumors accumulated over decades, once dismissed as envy, now took on flesh. Each new story, each revealed secret, was another nail in the coffin of a carefully constructed legend. The anatomy of the fall unfolded not just in court transcripts, but in the minds of millions. The glimmers of former glory faded, like old gold coated in dust. What seemed like freedom now looked like a pause cage, and this cage was built of fear and dependencies. The cultural reckoning began not with a roar, but with the cold, methodical precision of a coroner. It dissected the myth, exposing its pause, ugly underbelly. An empire built on images was now disintegrating under the weight of its own unpublished pictures. This was not a collapse, but a posthumous inventory of sins. And each item on that list was heavier than the last. Each item on this list was heavier than the last. The moral audit was complete. It revealed that even billions could not buy salvation from one's own shadow. The mansion, that symbol of hedonism, was in essence a digital coffin, a vault for ambitions, desires, and ultimately solitude. His story is not merely a chronicle of one man, but a mirror reflecting the dark corners of the collective psyche. The allure of power, the gleam of easy living, and the inevitable reckoning. All of it was part of one bitter testament. The myth of freedom, peddled for decades, turned out to be just a new form of pause enslavement. Those who believed in it and those who created it. Hefner's legacy is not just glossy pages, but scarred lives, shadows that did not dissipate even after his death. Emptiness, silence. All that remains is the echo of parties, trapped within walls that have seen too much. And the understanding, even the most carefully guarded secrets have an expiration date. And the price for them is always higher than it seemed at first. This is not a sentence, but a pause statement of fact. That even in a world where everything is for sale, there are things that cannot be bought. For instance, pause oblivion.